So hello, good morning everyone. Thank you for joining our session. Today we're going to talk about not the R&D side so much. I know we've had a lot of interesting talks on that, but once you have your innovation, as you've produced it, whether it's in medtech, whether it's in artificial intelligence, whether it's in medicines, what does it mean to actually get it to patients? And we know we learned a lot of lessons from the pandemic. We'll be touching on some of those lessons today. But we're at a time where we have to navigate serious disruption. And what can we do to navigate that disruption with changing geopolitics, with sometimes unpredictable geopolitics? So what will things look like in 3 months? If anyone in this room knows, I would be interested in how they came by such excellent foresight. I think there's a lot of unpredictability in the system right now. And we're concerned with supply risk in all of that. And so I'm really glad to be joined by my prestigious speakers today. So we have here Lisa Bonadonna. Lisa was a long time at GSK from 2005 to 2021. She was then in the Coalition for Epidemic Preparedness Innovations, and she is currently here today as the director of the Cummings Global Center for Pandemic Therapeutics, which received $250 million of investment from the philanthropist Jeffrey Cummings and also $75 million from the Victorian government. It's based in Melbourne. Lisa, additionally, on top of that, is also on the board of the African Vaccine Manufacturing Initiative. So quite a broad range of experience that Lisa will be bringing to our panel discussion today. We also have Josh O'Hara, who's joining us from Eli Lilly. Certainly a lot of interesting experiences that Josh had during the pandemic. We'll all easily remember that Lilly had at the time 4 COVID vaccines and then was able to develop a 5th expansion to support COVID patients. He is currently the head of public policy and regulatory law at Lilly. He began his career as associate analyst, where he was for the first 5 years of his career. And I saw this, Josh, as I was reading up on you this morning, working on long-term social security finances and simulation of that. But since then, he's worked for a long time now at Lilly and was heavily involved in the global supply chain during the negotiations all around the pandemic crisis. And then we're also joined by Mark Alexander Mal. Mark is the president of Pharma, Nutrition and Sustainability at Fresenius Kabi. He's had that role since 2001. I have to say, one thing I really appreciate in all of my discussions with Mark is that through Fresenius, we have this unique perspective on biopharma, on medtech, and on hospitals. So you get a really holistic view of what's going on across the healthcare ecosystem. He was also the vice president for the Medicines of Europe. That's an organization that has 58 associate members, and those members have 400 manufacturing sites across Europe and 126 R&D sites, so quite a significant and impactful organization. My name is Angeli Möller. I'm here representing the Zühlke Group. The Zühlke Group has existed since 1968. We provide business consulting solutions, but then really state-of-the-art and innovative engineering, analytics, software development, and artificial intelligence solution. So we work both with hospitals, pharmaceutical companies, medtech companies, and patient advocacy groups, both in the hardware and device design, as well, as I said, in the data and AI solutions. We're currently present in 10 countries, and our client base extends far beyond those 10 countries. So I want to kick us off by giving each of you the chance to share an impulse with our audience today on what you think is really top of mind when it comes to looking at the dynamic and changing environment, the turbulence that we're all living through, and how we can still bring our innovation to patients. So Lisa, can I hand over to you?
You don't want to go first?
See, now I have to warn the audience. Josh and Lisa and Mark already told me that if I don't talk enough about artificial intelligence during this talk, that they are going to pose questions to me. So I will say, Lisa, one of the things that we see in Zühlke is certainly that companies that we work with around the globe are having to look at how do they implement artificial intelligence in their supply chain and in their manufacturing, but at the same time, they don't suddenly have all this money lying around to do that. I mean, if there's anybody here who has a lot of money lying around to completely digitize, automate, and reap the full benefit of machine learning in their manufacturing and supply chain, we'd certainly, the rest of us, all be interested to hear from you. But the reality is that we have to find that investment from other parts of our organization. So we have to look and we have to drive efficiencies elsewhere so that we can quickly prepare for the future. And certainly we have a lot of pressures right now on our top line across the industry that are making that harder to do than it perhaps has been in the past. So we have some leaders who are already driving artificial intelligence and automation in manufacturing and supply chain, and they can now reap that benefit. But we have others who are perhaps, for a variety of good reasons, a little bit later to the game, and now they have to unlock that capital to quickly pay catch up. So that's one of the trends that we're seeing, and that's where we really come in and we help companies, first of all, not to just look at how they can increase profits through the use of machine learning and artificial intelligence. So I know yesterday we shared some stories around predictive maintenance and yield optimization, but also looking at how they can just have efficiencies in planning, efficiencies in workforce, efficiencies in how they are automating paperwork, regulatory documentation across each of their sites, which then unlocks that money that's locked into the operational support in manufacturing and supply chain and allows them to have a greater portion of investment to drive profitability, to drive growth. I would say we're seeing that across all regions. There's no exception to the cost pressures that everybody's facing right now. And yet, amongst the leadership in the pharmaceutical industry, we're seeing a very strong understanding that artificial intelligence is going to make a difference in regulatory, in manufacturing, and in supply chain. And there, I would certainly, as we get into the discussion, I know it's a topic everyone's aware of. It then becomes challenges like how do you find the talent that are able to drive forward that change even after you've unlocked the investment. And Lisa.
Great, thank you. I kind of needed that introduction around AI. So as Angeli says, I'm here today wearing two hats, and Angeli has introduced the Cummings Global Centre for Pandemic Therapeutics. And our elevator pitch is that it's kind of like CEPI, but for therapeutics. So why do we need a centre that is focused on therapeutics? And part of it is because we have new technologies like AI, like the advancements in computational science, like bioinformatics, that we can now bring into what remains as a global health challenge. Why have we focused on therapeutics? Well, because with COVID-19, what we actually found and what we saw the fruits of was about $140 billion worth of investment in vaccines. By comparison, for therapeutics, it was about $7 billion. Right? So there's this huge disparity between interventions for prevention and interventions that will treat conditions. And this is a reflection of what I see as a market failure, because you don't know if you're going to have a pandemic, you don't know if you're going to need a treatment. So why, as a corporation or a pharmaceutical company or as an investor, why would you want to put money into something that you may or may not need, right? So that's one of the reasons why we have market failure and why we need a vehicle like the Centre for Pandemic Therapeutics. I also think we have a real concrete example of what happens if we don't have this kind of investment that is leveraging everything that's available to us. And that is Paxlovid Paxlovid, which came out in response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Now, it's an interesting molecule because it showed specificity against MERS, which was kind of the forerunner to COVID-19, back in 2003, right? So we had the pandemic over a decade later, but still we didn't have an off-the-shelf therapeutic. And the reason was because there was no market for it. Now, very quickly, the work was done, and we had preclinical, and we had clinical work done, and we had fast track, and an intervention was made available. But it was too late to be truly effective as a therapeutic can be. Imagine if you had things off the shelf. Imagine how many hospitalisations or how much reduction in morbidity we could have had if we had those things on the shelf. So that's why we need a vehicle like the Cummings Global Centre for Pandemic Therapeutics to leverage all of this. Now, switching gears, I'm kind of going to go from the research end of the value chain and move right down to the topic of our discussion today, which is manufacturing and supply. And this is where my role on the board of the African Vaccine Manufacturing Initiative comes in. When we look at vaccine demand on the continent, even without going into the numbers, I think you can all appreciate it's very, very large. The African Union is 55 countries, highest birth rates in the world. You can just see that the demographics mean there is huge demand for vaccines. 1% of the vaccines needed by Africa are made in Africa. So I'll just say that again, 1% of the vaccines needed are made on the continent. Now, what COVID-19 showed us yet again, because it wasn't the first time, we saw it with H1N1, we saw it with Ebola, and even after COVID, we saw it with Mpox. Unfortunately, even though demand for the vaccines and the epidemiology is such that the need is greatest on the continent, Africa is at the end of the line when it comes to availability of vaccine interventions. So the African Union, a political gathering of the member states across the continent, have now decreed that by 2040, they want 60% of the vaccines needed by African citizens to be made on the continent. So that is a huge jump from the 1% of where we are now. Now, what we are working with not only the individual countries, because we as an association represent 25 distinct vaccine manufacturers, we need to work in a coordinated fashion because we do recognise that while space for African manufacturing needs to be found, created and encouraged for the benefit of health security of African citizens, but also global health security, we need to do so in a way that makes sense, is a sustainable approach in terms of market dynamics, and doesn't lead to an inflation of costs per unit of vaccine. And that requires the association to work with individual manufacturers, to work with individual governments, to work with the different regions across Africa, but also international, multinational and global stakeholders like Gavi, like UNICEF and like the development banks. Because what we're aiming to achieve is space for African manufacturers to grow, evolve and start meeting the demand needs of African citizens, but do so in a considered, thoughtful way that creates space for everyone. So that's why I'm here today and what I really want to contribute to this panel discussion.
And I appreciate Lisa as well, and I know you and I have discussed it before, is this remembrance of lessons learned from the pandemic, which is something that I know many of the people who've come to this summit still have in their mind, but is not everywhere as prevalent as it should be. And then the second part, the localization of manufacturing, which is a trend that was accelerated by the pandemic and continues for a range of geopolitical reasons and is becoming very strong. And Josh, I know that, of course, as I mentioned, Eli Lilly certainly had a strong and important role to play in our response to the pandemic, but you're also working with governments now on how should they perceive manufacturing, how should the Eli Lilly internal manufacturing prepare for the changes. I'd love to hear your first thoughts on that.
Yeah, I think the lessons of the pandemic from a geopolitical supply chain risk are the things that taught us about how to navigate this moment, which again, I think geopolitics and supply chain are certainly in the United States and certainly within pharmaceutical manufacturers. It's an issue that a lot more people are paying a lot more attention to. So I would say even 5 years ago, it was probably a small cluster of people in your manufacturing, quality, supply chain organizations who knew where the medicines were made, knew how they were moving across borders and at various points in the manufacturing process, and knew what the implications are for that. I think in the last 6 to 9 months, with the advent of tariffs and to some extent the abandonment from the WTO Pharma agreement, which now there are tariffs on innovative medicines. Now all of a sudden everybody cares. So there's a lot of lawyers, there's a lot of policy people, there's a lot of government affairs people, and so the politics of where things get made and how things move has never been, I think, more acute, or it hasn't been this acute actually since the pandemic. So going back to the pandemic, and I do need to just correct the record, we didn't make vaccines at Lilly, we made therapeutics, actually, apropos of what Lisa's center is prioritizing. And you're right, the market for vaccine therapeutics is largely governments, right? So that's where the interplay between the manufacturers and the government sector live. And again, I would say you're right. There was no business unit at Lilly dedicated to pandemic preparedness or to pandemic therapeutics. But two things happened that put us in a position to respond and to sort of quickly readjust what our role was going to be in this pandemic. The first was actually AI. And this was a very early application of AI. There was a 2019 or 2020 study published in The Lancet where a health AI platform was used to identify existing medicines that could be used to treat any aspect of COVID-19. And the one I think they focused on was the quote-unquote cytokine storm, which was that overreaction by the body that caused people to go into respiratory distress. And we had a molecule approved for psoriasis or psoriatic arthritis, I can't remember which, but an autoimmune condition. And this AI engine, this AI tool, identified this molecule as likely to have both sort of the binding and the blocking potential to make that cytokine storm, to mitigate the effects of that cytokine storm. And I remember asking our head of Lilly Research Labs, like, are we gonna study this? And he goes, well, I guess so. It was just that level of informality. And sure enough, they did study it, and they did get an emergency use authorization for this drug that had nothing to do with, in any glimmer of any researcher's eye, a cytokine storm. So we were able to quickly work with the regulators, get an emergency use authorization, create a probably 42-page prescriber guide translated into various languages, and then set up a special distribution system for that, as a 28-day supply in hospital use only, very different from what the commercial either distribution or utilization pathway would be. But again, no investment, no thought given to this prior to, I think, sort of external events unfolding and bringing this to our attention. But a great use case of AI. And then the other 3 therapeutics we had were monoclonal antibodies. And these are, again, products derived from the bloods and the cell lines from recovered patients. And it was not a strategic priority, I would say, for Eli Lilly and Company, except for we're always acquiring new cell lines and looking at new technologies and platforms. And so we were, I think, on the verge of signing a deal with a Canadian company to sell us some cell lines. In the last minute, they said, oh, by the way, we have some of the blood from the first recovered COVID patient in Canada. Did you want those cells as well? And the answer was, sure. So we took those and, again, very quickly developed an antibody to treat based on that patient's data. So we continued to refine, and as the virus shifted, we had the technology to make, you had to do two therapies, right? There was an escape vector, so you had to treat both the virus that you had and the virus that was coming and try to get ahead of any of the mutations on the virus. So that was an interesting challenge. But again, the thing we learned there about supply chains that is relevant to today is really the role of government. And government is going to be your best friend and it's going to be your worst enemy. And so when Lisa talks about localization of manufacturing, I think what a lot of us learned was even we, the manufacturers, don't have control over where our product goes. And a lot of the countries are like, we're pretty prescriptive. Nothing is leaving our borders until our population has had the access to the medicines or the vaccines or the treatments first. And so the government became very concerned about what was leaving. So export controls on medicines in times of pandemic, something we probably didn't anticipate. We sort of thought, hey, we could follow the virus and try to nip this thing in the bud and get the medicine to where it would be most useful. I don't think that's the way global governments would see things. Moreover, they become your customer, and they want to lock up as much of the supply as possible. So that's kind of was lesson one. Lesson two is they can also be your friends, because there are commodities, there are non-medicine components to making a therapeutic that you may want to be first in line for, because I think we all saw that the supply chain for medicine wasn't the only supply chain that got disrupted in the pandemic. You couldn't get vials, you couldn't get sand, you couldn't get like a lot of the components we need to make a lot of the equipment and the packaging and the delivery devices. And so what we got at Lilly and what other manufacturers who were part of the government's effort to address the pandemic were something called rated orders. We were sort of moved to the front of the line for accessing supply chains of other critical components. So the government, again, they can call a lot of the shots, and we didn't take any government money as a co-development or sort of risk elimination scheme. A lot of other companies did. We were always sort of, we'll go at risk and we'll sell to you. That's as far as we're willing to go, and we think that actually worked out pretty well. But so no matter how well laid your plans may be for your supply chain and for what you're going to do with products, I think the real lesson of the pandemic is the government very much cares about your supply chains, and we're seeing that again in the tariff and trade context, where now, because they're tariffing potentially medicines, they again care where are your supply chains. So that's the moment I think we're in.
Absolutely, Josh. And I think all of us are seeing that in every headline, in every newspaper at the moment, whether you're like us and you're a professional in the healthcare industry, or even if you're not, it's suddenly become a topic that's top of everyone's mind. And Mark, as I come to you now, and you have, of course, this broader perspective as well, so with the biopharmaceuticals, but also working across medtech and hospitals. I'd be interested to know what your first thoughts are that you'd like to share with the audience on the challenges we have and the opportunities in this space.
Yeah, thank you, Angeli. We've discussed Africa and the challenges in Africa. You were talking about originator innovative medicines and the challenges to bring them to market in disruptive times. I would like to talk a little bit about generics, biosimilars, IV fluids, off-patent products, mass products, commodities which are necessary. And when we shop today, if we need a product, we're used, we go to the shop, we get it when we need it. You go online, you order it from Amazon, from wherever in the web shop, and you get it when you need it by courier, in some cities even by drones, so speed matters. So we want to have it quick, and we want to have it cheap. Now, that is good in an ideal world when everything is fine and stable, but we're living in a real world, which is unfortunately burdened with climate change, fragmenting supply chains, what we have here in our title, geopolitical tensions, and demographic and technological change, which is straining our efforts, how we have supplied society in the past. And we have created some cluster risks about which I would like to talk. Let me give you a few examples. In September last year, Hurricane Helene moved a little bit further north than hurricanes normally move in the US and brought a lot of rain to North Carolina and flooded a competitor's plant which supplies 60% of the US IV fluid demand. One facility. This was taken out of operation for several weeks, and the company has done a fantastic job to supply and guarantee the most urgent hospital operations in the US. But that took flying in IV fluids from China, from Poland, from France, transporting the problem partly from the US to other countries. In the intent to become very cost efficient, to meet the ever lower price expectation in tenders in Europe, in the US, in many tender-driven markets, we have created a situation that today about 80% of our oncology APIs, active pharmaceutical ingredients, and the anti-infective key starting materials and intermediates for penicillins, for beta-lactam anti-infectives, are coming from India and China. Now, if you say, well, two big countries, no problem. But you need to know that about 70% of the key starting materials for Indian API manufacturing are coming, according to IQVIA, also from China, so creating a secondary dependency. And we're talking today about rare earth metals and, how should I say, export restrictions, which are mainly for technological use. But I can tell you, as one of the largest suppliers of injectable contrast media for MRI scans in the US, exports are today already bumpy. And what do you do when you don't get your gadabutrol, your gadaterate, when rare earths are not there? And COVID-19, you mentioned it, Josh. Pandemic laws empower countries today to ban exports, as we have seen in India, for example, in 2020, paracetamol, ibuprofen, other drugs were banned because there was concern local society could not be supplied. As a physician, I care very much that our healthcare professionals have the drugs they need to treat patients. And that is specifically the case for generic medicines, for IV fluids, for biosimilars, products we at Fresenius provide as one of the leading manufacturers in Europe, in the US, and China. So these are mass medicines which keep our healthcare affordable, but keep also the light on in the hospital. Just imagine a hospital without sodium chloride 0.9%. What do? You have no surgery, you have no ICU, you have no interventions, arthroscopies, whatever. You need that. So that means, as we heard yesterday from Dame Sally Davis in the AMR session, she said, anti-infectives are the backbone. We need them. It's like a fire extinguisher. You need to have them, and you need to make sure they work. And this is what we need to address. And this is what I want to talk about today, to address these critical dependencies on single sources or clustered supplies. And these discussions, which we try to address, for example, in Europe through the Critical Medicines Act, they need not to stop at the API. They need to include the key starting materials and the intermediates as well. But if you want to facilitate regional sovereignty to make sure that you decluster things, that you can supply the US for critical medicines out of US plants, Europe out of European plants, Africa out of African plants, and China out of Chinese plants, and India, you need to make sure that you also reward the investment in this resilience. That means procurement. Procurement is policy. Procurement needs to support different criteria than just lowest price. You need to reward resilience with local manufacturing and others, and there are right and intelligence concepts which have been provided and fostered from our generics associations and others on European, on country level, and so on. So if we do this right, we will be able to serve patients beyond expectation. That is one of the values we have at Fresenius. We live that, we do everything for that, and we're calling for politicians, for bodies and others to help us creating an environment that we can provide efficiently our patients, our societies also in future with the medicines they need.
Thank you for that, Mark. And I do have to say that your commitment also as a physician, as a trained physician, and then the pre-competitive work that you've done across companies in Europe, it really lives up to that testimony of, okay, it's really about getting the medicine to the patient, about getting all of the other materials, the IVs, the contrast agents, everything to the hospital, to the patients when they really need it. Now, I am going to talk this for the audience. I'm going to talk today and steer the panel to understand their thoughts around how that plays together with access and also with economic growth. But I'd love just to stay on the topic of manufacturing and supply chain just for a moment longer. So, Lisa, as you outlined for us, you have this one challenge, which is for pandemic preparedness. How do you start to attract investment for people? We're all act so surprised every time there's another outbreak or every time there's another pandemic. What do we have to do to keep the money flowing so that we don't have to be caught by surprise every time when something incredibly predictable happens? And then two, this very important point in Africa right now, what are the unique challenges that you're seeing there around setting up that manufacturing capability? So I'd love to hear your thoughts on where those key challenges are and if there are any examples from your work you can give.
Sure, and I think my answer might play to the intersection of those two questions. So I'm going to focus on the work we're doing with the African Vaccine Manufacturing Initiative. We work very closely, as I said, with a number of key stakeholders, Africa CDC, the Union, Gavi, UNICEF, etc. And I think it plays into what Mark was just alluding to. We need to consider pricing and what we're prepared to pay for resilience. And we also need to make sure that we have demand and sustainable demand. So one of the ways for preparing for a pandemic is actually to put the pandemic piece to one side, right? And think about what kind of systems we need to service a healthcare need that we have at the moment. So we have a dearth of vaccine manufacturing on the continent. We have seen, as a result of COVID-19, huge investments piling into the continent for capital investment. We've seen announcements around mRNA facilities, etc., etc. Those announcements have also been followed up with these projects are on hold, right? So we need to get out of that. We need to commit. And this is where I think organisations like the initiative that I'm with can help. Because as I said, we're representing 25 manufacturers. Not everybody can do everything. It makes no sense. It's not a good use of resources. And equally, what we don't want is just a whole lot of underutilised mRNA facilities. We need protein chemistry, we need lipoproteins, we need some of your more classic vaccine technologies as well as the newer technologies. So that's what we're working on to make sure that our members have a blueprint that they're kind of working towards. And so we have things called front-runner technologies and front-runner organisations. So of the 25, we have 3 front-runners who are more advanced than some of our other colleagues, but there is a blueprint that we're all working towards, and it is a blueprint that has been designed by a group within Africa CDC. They've identified the priority pathogens that they would like to have on-continent manufacturing for, and that's what we're working towards. So the first part of the answer is to have a blueprint, to have an overarching strategy that has actually come from the people who want this. You know, today I feel a little bit, even though I do have African heritage, I feel a little bit of as an imposter. You know, I have an Antipodean accent, but it comes from Australia, not from Africa. But I am acutely aware that it should be one of my African colleagues who's giving this presentation, but I'm doing it on their behalf. So the second point is the strategy has to come from the base, the people that you're trying to serve, the beneficiaries. The second thing is the enabling environment, and this is where I think Josh is critical, and the work that you do is critical, because we're sort of talking about tariffs, and at the moment the conversation is sort of a wee bit US focused, right?
There.
But with 55 countries on the continent, we have barriers that we need to make sure are incredibly porous when it comes to manufacturing vaccines. And what I mean there is that not only am I talking about end product usage, but all of the inputs, which I think is where Mark was coming from. We need to make sure that there is an opportunity across the continent, even if you're not making an end product, to contribute. So you've got the sort of regulatory environment, but then we scale it up to what can our international stakeholders do. And one of our pieces of work we've been very, very focused on with Gavi is something called the African Vaccine Manufacturing Accelerator. And this is designed to offset the recognised challenge of established manufacturers have had decades to manufacture vaccines at scale and at lower cost. So if you're a new player coming in, you're not going to be at that level, right? So this is a financial mechanism that will reduce over time, that is designed to offset that balance. But that pricing offset is only going to work if you've got definable volumes that you can plan your business against. Mm-hmm. And part of that will come from country demand, so African nations recognising the quality standard of African manufacture being equivalent to everyone else, which is why we want to use WHO pre-qualification standards. So we need the demand to come from the countries themselves, but we also need international procurers like Gavi, supported by UNICEF, also carving out demands that will be supplied from African manufacture. So I think, you know, again, coming back to the pandemic piece, yes, and to get there, we need to have a platform, and I think we need to be looking at the healthcare challenge today and then rolling back how that would apply to a pandemic intervention in the future. So I'll stop there.
No, thank you, Lisa. What I really appreciate there is with the recognition of the competition. So the very real competition that new manufacturers setting up in Africa are going to face. I mean, we certainly see state-of-the-art facilities in India and China, which are well established, which are producing tremendously large volumes. And of course, these will then be their competitors. And so I think making sure that there's the influx of investment to make it possible, as well as these reproducible frameworks. So you have this regional sovereign asset that you can start to establish. Josh, I know that many of us are following Lilly's very strong pipeline in the news, and one of the things there, as well as the therapeutic innovation, is of course looking at the formulation and of the new innovation that Lilly's able to bring to the market. I'd be interested, as you look at the changes that we can make in manufacturing and supply chain to actually get that new innovation in the Lilly pipeline to patients, what are the key use cases and opportunities that you've seen?
Sure. There are a couple, but I do want to pick up on Lisa's point about sort of localization and in Africa and investments and contributions from others. Lilly partners with a manufacturer in Egypt, Eva Pharmaceuticals, to manufacture insulin on the continent of Africa, and I think it's one of the first sort of partnerships in that vein. And so we have been, I think, delighted by the willingness of the African medicines agencies and the Egyptian government to support that effort. And I think that part of that is there's a knowledge transfer that has to occur, and that's the investment and that's the commitment we can make. And so when the Eva manufacturing team showed up at our company asking to audit our API production facilities, I think we're sort of pleasantly delighted, and it's great to see that muscle being built on the continent. And so I think we try to do that, not just because it's good business. I mean, supply chain decentralization is a key to resiliency, but also I think there are opportunities for industry to play a role there. In terms of accelerating the innovation, the access to the innovation globally, and this will bleed into our access conversation, but there is a formulation issue. I mean, I think if you look at the innovation in the GLP-1 space, for example, the Ozempics and Mounjaros and Zepbounds of the world. These are cutting-edge new medicines, but they're injectables. They're cold chain, and so the move to oral formulations is going to be critical in reaching more patients. And I think our CEO has been pretty clear in earnings calls and elsewhere that the global solution for accessing these medicines is through that sort of chemistry, is through developing presentations that can go through more well-established, I'd say, pathways and don't have to rely on cold chain. So that's the commitment I think manufacturers make, is trying to get that simple, usable formulation to patients all across the globe. And I'll say at Lilly, we're to some extent the victims of our own success. Our global health initiative, internally, we had set a goal in 2020 to reach 30 million patients worldwide by 2030. And that had a nice, snappy tagline, 30 by 30. By 2025, as of this year, there are 57 million people taking Lilly medicines across the globe. So we beat the goal, which we thought was really audacious at the time, and we've had to revise our metrics up to I think 150 million by 30 is the new goal we've set for ourselves. So hopefully we're able to blow through that as well. But it has been gratifying to see that and our scientists are, I think, laser focused on that impact on human health globally, and that's what I think keeps a lot of people motivated at the company.
Thank you for that. And I will add, also because Josh told me that I'll be in trouble with him if I don't talk enough about my experience with artificial intelligence. But I know that I spent quite a bit of time while I was in academia focused on the modeling and simulation of single-chain antibodies. And many of you in this room will know the challenges we still have with batch production, even though monoclonal single-chain antibodies are widely spread and widely used therapeutics right now. I think where it's possible, certainly, to come up with formulations which can have the same therapeutic impact, but fewer of the production challenges and costs, I think that's the place where every biopharma wants to go. And it's certainly important to invest in that modeling and simulation and pathway research to really see where that might be possible.
That's a huge point. I mean, I didn't make it in the context. It's a weedy point because what you need for monoclonal antibodies is generators. I don't know what these things are, but there's generator capacity, and Amgen had a little extra, and Samsung had some, and so you have to kind of go throughout the globe and find the capacity, whereas, I mean, you still have capacity constraints with orals and small molecule, but they're fewer and they're, I think, easier to address. So.
And Josh, that really brings me up to a topic I wanted to discuss with Mark. So during the pandemic, we were collaborating with each other much more across the industry. And you talked about the capacity of generators that we used at different companies. Mark, I know that you particularly have strong feelings around pre-competitive collaboration, how we can work together, and where that lies with the challenges that we see here with manufacturing and supply chain. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's indeed right. So you have been talking about the challenge to supply GLP-1 peptides to millions of people and optimize supply chain and so on. We at Fresenius, or the generics industry, has to provide hundreds of different molecules to billions of people. And I spoke before about the cluster risk. 80% coming from China, India, from oncology, APIs, and so on. And if we want to decluster, if we want to de-risk that, the complexity for us is you need to create an environment where you regionalize capabilities, competencies, and capacities, not only for single molecules or single technologies, but for lots of them. If you leave this somehow to single companies and everyone invests in everything, that will not work for obvious reasons. If everyone invests just in the interesting ones, you will reduce choice and you will reduce excess. And so therefore, we are floating the idea to have something like an industry-led regional network to coordinate the investment in, for example, networks for key starting materials, intermediates, and APIs across Europe or the US, which follows a little bit what in the 70s has been created in the aviation industry with Airbus. Mm-hmm. Airbus is today a success. But it was not easy in the beginning. In Europe, for example, where you had lots of fragmented plane manufacturers, no one big. So every country, different industry companies provided where they were good at. And together we created a giant in aviation industry. I'm not promoting here, let's say, to have API company, but I think we need to create, as a European Union, we need to create regionally the competence to provide at least the most relevant APIs, like beta-lactam anti-infectives, certain sedatives, certain hormones, steroids, things like that, dexamethasone and so on, to be prepared for crisis and to be prepared to provide our societies also in situations of natural disaster, political distress or others with the critical medicines.
And Mark, it's not only Airbus, but as I think about organizations such as EBI, so the European Molecular Biology Labs and European Bioinformatics Institute, which is one organization, it has 17 countries co-funding it, a European asset, and then also things like the CERN Institute, where I've been personally heavily involved, again, multiple countries coming together and fund it. We have to accept that in some regions, and Europe is one of them, if we try to go it alone as individual countries, we're just strong in one part of that supply chain. And as we saw with Airbus, where we had some organizations better at engines, some better at the wings, when we come together and we bring together our assets, that's when we can truly start to compete as a region and start to secure the healthcare of patients in our region. I think it's very smart activity that we're seeing on the African continent. And of course, we've seen China, India, and the US already progress quite far down this road for the last few years.
And in Europe, the EU Critical Medicines Act is providing all the frame for that. We just need to get moving now, yeah?
And extend it, as you say, to include the raw materials that are needed as well. Great. Then I wanted to now talk about access. And here, a lot of the work we do around making supply chain and manufacturing as cost-effective as possible is to ensure patient access. I mentioned very briefly in my introduction the topic of yield optimization. So one of the things that we've been able to do is to support companies with their yield optimization, with their predictive analytics. This is both in the small molecule as well as in the biologics area, and that's through mostly machine learning, predictive analytics. One of the biggest challenges there, as you can imagine, is trying to get harmonized data across the multiple manufacturing sites. That's a lot of fun because sites are built at different times with different infrastructure, and then trying to retroactively make sure you have harmonized data sharing even within the same company across their sites is one of the first challenges that we face. But in the end, why do we do all of that work? We do all of that work so that we can reduce the cost of the medicines that we are producing, reducing the cost of the innovation, should it be in the medtech area, and therefore broadening the access to patients. So reducing that time to market as well as increasing the yield and being able to serve more patients globally. I would be interested in knowing what sort of activities you've been involved in trying to broaden access. And Josh, this time I'd be interested to kick off with you and your thoughts around Lilly.
Yeah, I mean, you talk the AI point, the pinch point for us, and I think some of the statistics I've heard even in the rooms in this conference so far. I think yesterday someone from the main stage mentioned that something like 53% of people in Africa are overweight or obese, and that was a jaw-dropping number. In the United States, it's around 43%. But imagine the number of qualified healthcare professionals you need to diagnose and then manage the care of all of those people. There are not enough doctors to write the prescriptions, to evaluate the cases, and to manage the care. So one of the key components of access is actually physician training, nurse training, these kind of very practical things. And that's an area where AI is actually something we are looking at. And this notion, I call it AI doctor. I don't think that's the real name of it, but it's sort of a consultation service that one can have. You take a picture of your body, and they can do the measurements, and they can diagnose, for example, obesity, at least as a starting point, a threshold matter, and then you have maybe a telehealth node, and then you have the ability to identify the proper patients and get them on the proper medicines. So that to us is an interesting access play. There are opportunities also to move things from prescription only to over-the-counter. And there are new pathways coming even in the United States there that are technology enabled. There's a sort of there are risks that you have to manage, but if you can do that through technological solutions, you can maybe put more control and give the consumers more control and more access directly that way without the intermediation of a prescriber. So those are some of the things we're looking at from the access side.
I think the point around how can you make something over the counter because you're actually tracking how someone's using it, you're actually tracking the safety risks. I know that all of us are aware that patient adherence is a perpetual problem. So one part is how can I know that they're taking the medicine as described on the label, and then wearables have opened up a whole new world of being able to track patients between these discrete data points of a clinician visit. Mark, I'd be interested, of course, to come to the Fresenius viewpoint when it comes to access. So you're spread across the globe and working in so many therapeutic areas. How do you see the opportunities for access?
Well, there's, of course, the aspect of access to drugs, but then it's the access to healthcare. Access to drugs, access to medicines I spoke about, it has to do with the capacity, the capability, the right environment. It has also to do with the fact to have the right products at the right time, in the right quantity and quality at the right place. And that requires modern AI-based forecasting tools, production planning tools, supply chain tools to make sure that you're as efficient as possible in your production planning and material usage. So this is something we deploy in our plants, in our systems at Fresenius to make sure that we're competitive, because competitiveness is key, that we can provide advantages to healthcare systems. But then it also comes to providing healthcare, and We're one of the largest, or the largest private hospital chain in Europe, with more than 130 hospitals, about 350 medical centers. And in our hospital chain in Spain, for example, Quirónsalud, I would say we're quite proud to have one of the most advanced IT environments utilizing also AI, helping the physicians to take decisions, take the right treatment decisions, to plan the patient journey in the most efficient way to reduce the length of stay for the patient benefit, getting home to their beloved ones as quick as possible but healthy, with the right outcome, also to be efficient for us as a company. But that is also helping then the healthcare professionals, doctors, nurses. They're not burdened with writing release letters or doing administrative tasks, which you can give to AI. They can focus on working with a patient. That's good for quality. It's good for motivation. If you think about the workforce gap of about 10 million people globally by 2030, well, 2030 sounds a little bit far down the road. What we know is we have already today about 1.2 million healthcare professionals less than we need in Europe. Physicians, nurses, midwives. How do we fill that? Well, we need in Europe, from our perspective, immigration policy, which allows to have a genuine EU-wide market. We have transparent and clear recognition rules for certifications and the professional results of people coming from outside, and a welcome culture which allows us to bring also the resources in to fill that gap. So in the combination of AI, most modern tools, but also a working immigration policy and a recognition, that is, I think, for me, one of the keys to provide healthcare access, and also medicine access here in Europe. And the same would certainly apply in other regions like the US or wherever else.
First of all, I absolutely agree. And I just made me reflect on some of the things I've heard this week, and perhaps the audience have heard similar sentiments. I was in a roundtable that we led on Sunday, and there were some concerns about artificial intelligence, automation, replacing healthcare professionals. And I just have to say, I've been working in research hospitals and university hospitals, let me think now, since a long time, 2005, so for the past 20 years. And it's really overwork is what you see in those hospitals. You see so many tasks, also in the pharmaceutical industry, on manufacturing sites. You see so many people with their time caught up in highly repetitive tasks, in documenting tasks. And I think, to your point, Mark, it's about how do you, of course, meet the gap in capacity that just needs more people, but what is the capacity you can free up through the use of machine learning, through the use of automated systems? And I think there's a huge opportunity for that. Lisa, I'd be keen on the access thought, of course, somewhere where you've been heavily involved throughout your career. What are the opportunities that you're seeing for access?
So I might just pick up on the comments you were making about AI, because in the context of the Cummings Centre, that is absolutely something we want to apply. You know, how do we get high throughput screening? How do we get better targets? How do we progress them through to preclinical work and clinical work? So, I mean, that is very much something that we want to do. In terms of access, wearing my hat related to the African Vaccine Manufacturing Initiative, I'm tempted to go super macro, right, and then bring it back. Geopolitics at the moment is requiring us to go beyond really what we've had to consider from a humanitarian perspective previously. We've sort of, for the last sort of 40, 50 years, we've been able to get our arms around what that looks like. Now with climate change, now with conflict, we are going to have to think about how do we deliver healthcare in very fragile circumstances with displaced communities. And in many instances where the healthcare delivery is not wanted because it's almost being weaponised. So I think there is, and I'm not the right person, but I see it as a challenge. We're going to have to come up with ways of delivering healthcare that thinks about that environment. Then I'm kind of going to roll it back to kind of right here, right now. And with regards to access, for me, there are a number of dimensions to it. You actually need an intervention that is just physically available to you wherever you are. You need an intervention that is not only available, but it's of an acceptable standard. You need an intervention that is going to meet the needs in terms of affordability. So there are a number of different factors that are all tied up in that. But rolling it all back, first and foremost, you need an available intervention. And this is where I come back to vaccines being made available on the continent. We can then consider affordability, we can then consider acceptability, etc., how we're going to deliver it. Parentheses, Africa is pretty good in terms of delivery of healthcare in low resource settings. Use of drones, payment using cell phone SIM cards, telemedicine, whatever you want to think about, Africa is a fantastic place for it to be operationalised and proof of concept and being in use, and there are numerous examples. But at the end of the day, first and foremost, an intervention must be available. And this is where it's fundamental for me that we have technology donors, because it is going to take time for Africa to develop its own biopharma R&D. We have brilliant researchers. I mean, our team in Botswana were the first to sequence one of the COVID-19 variants. So the capability is there, but it's going to take time to build. So in order to have access, we need the technology donors coming in, and we also need, from an acceptability point of view, WHO prioritising what Africa needs for itself, even if they are not the latest, greatest innovation, which is where their attention may be drawn.
Oh, thank you for sharing that. And I mean, you just highlight how complex access is. So how many variables are in place? You may have the innovation, but if it's not affordable, then it's not going to reach the patient. You may have the innovation, but if you haven't got the right formulation or the right delivery mechanism, it's not going to reach the patient. If you haven't got the local diagnosis available, and of course we all know the challenges globally around rural areas, around areas that are maybe many in Europe where they just don't have the right local general practitioner to support getting them onto the right patient pathway. So I certainly appreciate your point that there's a lot of parameters at play to make sure that access finally happens, but that first of all, that innovation has to be there and available to them. Maybe just one point from my side. I was working at the beginning of last week with a company called PyCon, and PyCon based in Heidelberg, so they grew out of Heidelberg, but their mission is to create data platforms in the oncology space which truly have a strong genetic diversity. So the founder comes from India, and she was studying at the university in Heidelberg, and she saw that there were big gaps in the data availability for different regions. And she started off with India, but now they're in 60 different countries, focused initially on histopathology images across genders, across socioeconomic groups. And I think certainly to Lisa, while I was listening to you talk about the need for that innovation to be there, I think it's also at the beginning when you're developing that innovation, having that broad access in mind. So how can I be confident the innovation I'm developing is really going to be representative and effective in a large population?
Exactly.
So I'm going to pester my panel with one more question that I'm curious about and want their thoughts on, but then I'm going to come to the audience for some questions after I've done that. So consider this your flag of preparation as audience members, that we're going to come to you in a short while and see what thoughts you have for our expert panel. And so I want to kick off with Mark on this one. And in many of the talks that I've heard today, we've heard about the cost of healthcare. And in many of the newspaper headlines, as we look at our health insurance systems around the world, we hear about the cost of healthcare. And that's a very real topic. It's a very real topic that we have to think about. We have aging populations. As we have better diagnosis, that's fantastic. But then we also understand the broader range of diseases that we have to tackle. But at the same time, the healthcare industry is a huge contributor to GDP and GDP around the world, creating jobs, creating new tax revenue. I'd be interested from your perspective in Fresenius, but also your work across multiple companies in a pre-competitive sense. What factors need to be in place for us to be an even bigger contributor to economic growth in the countries in which we operate?
Well, that's a broad question, and
Easy
you can
question,
probably
right?
you can discuss a ton of different dimensions which could contribute to, let's say, growth of healthcare industry. I think it's no doubt healthcare industry is a growth and a prosperity factor, not a cost factor. This is something I think we need to change in our mind. If you just see about 10% of the exports in Europe are coming from the healthcare industry. 1 in 7 jobs in Europe is in the healthcare industry. 1 in 7. More than 1.5 trillion euro gross value added today already. So that means jobs, it means tax, but the service we provide to society is we make patients healthy again. We allow them to go back to their families, to go back into the jobs and help our societies to flourish. Now, I just need to link to the topics I mentioned before. If we repatriate, for example, our production for intermediates, for key starting materials, you might see this as a cost factor. But if you talk to the pharmacists, how much time and money it costs to find replacement for non-available drugs, it costs money. This is money we save if we do that. So it's a matter of becoming more efficient. We're thinking about deploying artificial intelligence, for example, what we discussed. Take the example of malnutrition. About 40% of the patients in hospital are malnourished. And there was a study in the UK that was estimating the cost of malnourishment in the hospital in terms of extending the stay, complication, and so on. So applying artificial intelligence, for example, for better treatment in the hospital, eliminating malnourishment by consequent application of clinical nutrition, enteral or parenteral nutrition in the hospital, that can save cost. So that means when we see each other as a modern industry which applies most modern technologies, embraces them and applies them, we become more efficient, and then we can afford also to repatriate our production and so on and become sovereign for our societies, let it be the US, let it be India, Asia, let it be Europe. And from that side, I believe there's a lot of potential. I think we need to change this narrative a little bit. When you think about Europe or Germany as an export nation, we talk about our strong industries like automotive industry, machine engineering. I think we need to add healthcare as a strategic industry. Germany has already done that in the last coalition contract, but I think it's worthwhile to do that across Europe. We are a strong industry supporting our society. We deserve the environment to facilitate what we can render and supply to society. And with that, I think there can be a very good future for that.
No, I absolutely agree. And I think it's for each of you, as you leave the room, I hope you can take just a moment as well to reflect and then hopefully communicate to stakeholders you meet who are considering whether or not it makes sense to make local investments into healthcare. What is that return of invest? So there's an opportunity, and I liked your point about the cost to pharmacists of trying to find alternatives, of making sure that every single time we're not just communicating the cost of the work we do, but we're also communicating the value saved. And Josh, I'd love to hear the thoughts that you have, your perspective from Lily.
Yeah. First off, I want to acknowledge these. I mean, generics and vaccines are probably the best bargains in healthcare in terms of social returns. But the innovators have a role to play too. Obviously, we have the direct investments that we make. I mean, Lily's announced, I think, $50 billion in capital projects and expansions planned over the next few years. That's a lot of factories. That's a lot of jobs. That's a lot of construction. That's a lot of, and then there's the multiplier effect from those, where I think those manufacturing jobs, for every dollar spent, there's I think a return of like $7 in the community. And that's an important story. But I do think even these cutting edge innovative medicines that do often get looked at as a cost, as a big social cost, these GLP-1s, what we're seeing and what we're, I think, genuinely convinced of is that there are a lot more social benefits, and there's a lot more benefit to society created by those medicines. There's roughly 200 comorbid conditions associated with overweight and obesity, and if you can prevent those or reduce those, there are dramatic savings to the healthcare system. And some of the early, I'll say, health economic studies that we've seen show those benefits accruing much more quickly than I think even people had anticipated. So one state in the United States that studied their own expenditure data relative to savings, Delaware, very small state, easy to get the data, I suppose, they saw that they were basically cost neutral after 1 year of covering these GLP-1s, which that seems early. A lot of the academic modelers have these medicines being, more safer than coster within, 2 or 3 years. There was another real-world evidence study done by a benefits consulting firm. So this is a firm in the United States that would tell employers, we don't have, we do have a lot of national health care, but we also have a lot of private health care insurance. And these benefit consultants try to advise their employer clients to say, hey, if you're going to create an insurance benefit, here's what you should do. And I think early on, they were skeptical about these GLP-1 medicines. And after doing a study, they found that within 2 years, there were savings to private health insurance plans through expanded coverage and access to these medicines. And in fact, that consulting firm itself changed its own insurance benefit design to cover these medicines. So the more it's not a revolutionary statement to say the healthier the people are, the more work they're going to do, the more things they're going to buy, the more life they're going to enjoy, and that's an important economic engine. But we're seeing that, and we kind of think it'll be interesting to see how that can play out and what kind of additional savings these new medicines can unlock.
And I really like it. It's not just AI, it's just standard health statistics that let us really show back to our relevant stakeholders the cost benefits of the innovation we're bringing to market. I know one of the other points, Josh, that we discussed yesterday is freeing up caregivers. So as you have a healthier population, their family members who are currently not able to work because they're providing care, that's also a dynamic that changes as we're able to support a healthier population. And then before we go to the audience for their questions, Lisa, on the topic of growing an economy through these investments in healthcare, I'd be interested in the areas you're working, in the regions you're working. What are the challenges and opportunities you're seeing to do that?
Yeah. Success breeds success, right? So in the context of the Cummings Global Centre, there is a reason why it's located in Melbourne, Victoria, Australia, and that is because almost invariably Australia is between sort of 5 and 10 on the ranking scale for medical research innovation, which is not bad for a country that is geographically enormous, but in terms of population, we're talking around 25, 27 million people. So really punching above its research weight. But as a result of doing that consistently, it attracts more and more investment. So, the 250 million plus the 75 million from the government, plus we also have a collaboration with the University of Bonn, which carries a price tag of roughly another 50 million Australian dollars. So I think once you establish these things, it makes it easier to get that next investment, because you have that stamp of approval, that stamp of actually these people can deliver a result. If I go to the other area that I'm representing today, and sort of vaccine manufacturing on the continent, to date, pretty much Africa's contribution has been, here's some nice epidemiology that we've actually done at community level, and I was in a presentation yesterday just how important community level versus hospital level epidemiology is. We're providing you some lovely data. We're in your laboratory networks, and here's an enormous demand in terms of our birth cohort and our citizens who need protecting. But none of that is actually being satisfied through manufacturing on the continent, which means Africa is missing out on all of the economic benefit. And, we're talking billions and billions of dollars here. We are missing out on creating the capability and capacity building, the education, increasing the skills at tertiary level, increasing STEM at secondary level, keeping kids in school as opposed to having to cover for sick parents, etc., etc. So we're kind of, not only are we disadvantaged from a societal point of view, not only are we disadvantaged from an equity point of view, we're also missing this fantastic opportunity, which I think, Mark, you've highlighted, just how stimulating from an economic point of view, being in this environment and being in this sector and having this opportunity to make things locally can actually deliver.
Yeah, thank you, Lisa. And I'm really excited to see how that continues and where we see the vaccine production now start to scale up in Africa. And we'll all be keeping in mind that 60% target, from 1 to 60%. And I really like that ambitious target. So we certainly...
Well, we've seen that ambitious targets work, don't we, Josh?
Yeah, absolutely.
Exactly. Great. So in a moment, I'll come back to my panelists for their final thought. But before I do that, I would love to take some questions from the audience. Great. We have a microphone coming your way. So I think we saw 1, 2, 3, 4 here. So we'll make sure we get those 4 questions. Hi.
Yeah. I think I could ask this question to all of you who address John. I'm one of those that reminds you that AI wasn't mentioned sufficiently. And Tobias Schuster, a medical doctor for an AI orchestration and reinforcement startup. You have discussed intensively the challenges related to resilience infrastructure, crisis support tools, AI integrations in-house, AI and human workforce coordination. Do you develop everything in-house? Do you rely on large tech companies or rather collaborate with more flexible, nimble and faster acting AI startups? Thank you.
Thank you. I think that one was for you, Josh.
Yeah. A lot of partnership, a lot of reliance with technology companies. I'm actually surprised by the AI capabilities we do have in-house, but we don't have a lot of the coding capabilities directly. But we are able to explore, and we have it's a pretty sophisticated system, and so yeah, we need tech vendors to do that.
Yeah, and from the centre perspective, we sit within the University of Melbourne, so we can access the department, but also when we issue our grant or we open up our grant opportunities, we actively encourage that they are partnering, and the partner could be in private sector or the partner could be another university. It really could come from anywhere.
And I will say, but all of the use cases are endogenously derived. So this is just people are sitting around thinking about what can I use AI for? So we've got a lot of projects, and I think every team is sort of metriced on in gold for, will you deliver on 5 bold AI ideas this year? Even the law division, frankly. And there's a lot there to do. And I also was at a science fair at the company, and there was AI inventing molecules constantly just on run. And so there's just constant research applications, obviously, too.
Okay, so I think we've got a question here in the middle.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for this insightful discussion. My name is Dominika Flisek. I'm a medical student from Poland, representing the International Federation of Medical Students Association, which represents 1.5 million medical students worldwide. And during the panel discussion, you mentioned preparedness for future pandemics and other crises. You also mentioned the need of collaboration of diverse healthcare professionals to assure building the healthcare resilience. So my question is, do you see any perspectives in assuring better preparedness for future manufacturing disruptions and building resilience of healthcare systems by applying changes in the current medical curriculum? Thank you.
Thank you. And I am really glad to see how many medical students we've had at the summit. Mark, with
Do you want to?
You're a
yeah,
doctor.
you see, my panel love giving me questions. I've noticed this already. I mean, I would say I had this same question in an earlier panel today, and I do think it's very important that medical schools are exposing their students to the tools and technologies which will be every day when they enter the hospitals. And of course, this doesn't have to be a special or separate program. Sometimes it actually shouldn't be, because I think it would be better if you're looking into cardiovascular care to understand what are the tools and solutions available to you in cardiovascular care. And we know now for radiologists, it's absolutely standard that they're exposed to the tools that would help them in the future. So I think it's true for the medical professional. I'm also a molecular biologist, and I would say it's true for molecular biologists. I would say it's true for nursing staff. I think that we have to look at our educational system and make sure that we're exposing people to the ethics considerations that they're going to face in the future with these artificial intelligence tools, and also to make sure that they feel familiar and comfortable. One of the interesting workshops that the Zühlke group actually runs for many of our clients is a workshop on the art of the possible. And I often enjoy those because it's just that before you scope out some work that you might do where you say we're going to automate a process or we're going to increase yield optimization, you say, does everybody here in the leadership level, but also at every stage in their career, understand what is actually possible just by looking at use cases that are running in hospitals, in pharma companies, and medtech companies? And I think making sure that that awareness is there is a big value add. Anything to add from the panel? Lisa?
I would add on the curriculum that we should also include, and not only in relation to AI, but more broadly, some of the challenges in terms of mis and disinformation. So things like vaccine hesitancy or misunderstanding of what a new intervention or even an old intervention is actually going to do for a community. I think our newer doctors who are coming through are really well placed because they're super tech savvy. They know what the threads are and what the latest X tweet thing is, TikTok, whatever is happening. So I think you are just going to revolutionise our ability to handle some of that misinformation that is going to become part of your daily life.
So we have a question over here, and then this is our last, and then we'll come across. Microphone's on its
You
way.
should have saved her the walk, actually.
I know. Oh, I'm realizing this. You're quite right, Josh.
Thank you. I'm Hans Hogersel. I used to be the director of the Essential Medicines program at WHO, including the pre-qualification. But now I'm the chair of the Lancet Commission on Essential Medicines. And there will be a big chapter on this trend and this demand for, let me say, regional production, basically non-India, non-Chinese production, including Africa. And my question to you is, we will be in a position to advise also governments. Our report is actually aimed at governments. Now, what, from the industrial viewpoint, are important, let me say, demands? What should we write that governments should do? Now, I know about prepare a good pharmaceutical ecosystem with regulatory support and staff, that sort of thing. We know about removing the tariff barriers between the countries. We know about buy regionally, give us a market. We know about regulatory harmonization and pool procurement. These things we know. Is there anything missing? Is there anything else you would like us to say to governments? And let's focus on Africa, but it would be basically more regions in the world in the same situation.
So I'd like to jump in by protecting the resources that exist within the WHO and going further, adding even more resources, because I think at the end of the day, yes, we have plans for the African Medicines Agency. Yes, we have plans for the national regulators. Yes, we have plans for increasing the number of ML3, maturity level 3, maturity level 4 labs. We have biosecurity, clinical trial approvals, etc. We have plans for all of those things. But if we're going to be really successful with a continental point of view, and we're going to, coming back to my point around acceptable interventions for Africa, we want to use the global standard, and the global standard is the WHO. So resources are needed. And then if I could just pull that thread, going back to something you and I were discussing in the session yesterday, I also see the WHO having an important standard-setting role when it comes to the application of AI in healthcare.
And the one issue left off your list, from my perspective, is intellectual property protection and regulatory data exclusivity. And so without I don't think that any innovative manufacturer would invest in any market where those foundational issues, without intellectual property, we don't have a company. And generics don't have a pipeline. So I think that piece is critical for any environment in which I think innovative manufacturers would do business.
Yes, you would only support, let me say, the development of the originator products, but there should be a huge generic production capacity in Africa as well.
I think we have all the knowledge we need to take a decision. But what industry, for example, would need, from my perspective, my personal perspective, is planning safety. Because if you look into the EU Critical Medicines Act, which was published in March this year, there is the intent to bring, for example, API manufacturing to Europe. But as long as our procurement systems still favor lowest cost, and the place of manufacturing, the source of the product, does not play a role, this is not fitting together. So that means we need to apply our knowledge, that we say we understand, to have a full picture. We need to put these 6 puzzle stones in place. Now we need somehow a coordinated action to bring these puzzle stones on one place and put them together. Not only say we know we have the 6 pieces, because the 6 pieces alone do not give a picture. And this is for me the part now with the Critical Medicines Act, for example, in the example of Europe, just start moving. Enable industry to talk together, but then also make sure that procurement policies match. In the US, it's the situation at the moment, for example, a lot of investment is attracted and to avoid tariffs and so on. So this is where all the big companies are pledging money. But we also know that the companies who have already invested in the past in the US have about 40-45% idle capacity. So that means also here you could say, how do you create an incentive to use the capacity you already have from the existing, whether investment is already done? You know what I mean?
And if I could just come in on the generics part, in a previous role I was with Aspen Pharmacare, which is actually a very significant generics manufacturer. For example, they're the #1 pharma company in Australia, which totally surprised me. And they are manufacturing to international standard. They sell all across the world. They follow the regulatory pathways. They are moving into biologicals. They made a vaccine for J&J during COVID-19. So I think even on the continent, you've got pathfinders who are already there with generics, as well as sort of trying to move into some of the more innovation-based interventions.
So with that, I just want to say I'm getting the nod for the time, but exactly. So
Okay.
I had a favour to ask for the panel. We had one question here at the front that we just ran out of time for, and I will invite him to come up and talk to us as we close the session, so that at least we can prioritise you as people come up to ask the panel questions as we close out. Just to have a summary here. So we heard about from Mark about the idle capacity in some manufacturing units, so the importance of thinking very carefully as we start to build out new investments into manufacturing capabilities. But I think beyond that, if you take home anything, really it's this point around the success of Airbus. Is there an opportunity in the European healthcare industry for us to do something similar, where we come together to create a commercial entity that can give us strength within the European region? We had some very valuable lessons learned from Josh on what we can do with expanding the use of existing molecules through the use of artificial intelligence, and also being able to respond very quickly during the pandemic, and how can we contain and hang on to those lessons learned. And then Lisa, I really want to thank you very much for sharing the work that you're engaged in Africa, but also in Melbourne, for serving us globally for our pandemic preparedness. So take this as a message. Please don't look surprised next time we have a pandemic or outbreak. I think most of us here know that we need to constantly be prepared. Thank you for your attention. We'll make sure that we invite you up to come and ask your question. But I just want to thank the panel so much for their insights today. Thank you all.